What would you do if you went to go pet a dog and you realized that there was something horribly, horribly wrong with it? Something that alluded to the fact that this was no dog, but instead possibly a creature from another world. What would you do if this wasn't only that, but that it slowly began to infect your life, taking over your dreams, taking over all of your waking thoughts, with paranoia, anxiety, and fear of what it might do to you? In today's story, we'll be exploring that and seeing what our main character does, and at the end of the video, I'll give my spiel about what I think I would do. Hello, I'm CC, and welcome to the Crucible of Character. This story was written on the r/NoSleep subreddit by pbubs1997, and it's entitled Good Boy. And it starts like this. I live in a rural part of eastern Kansas. It's your typical Midwestern small town. There's a church on every block, but the nearest hospital is 20 miles out. It's the quiet, bucolic little corner of the world that I call home. It can get boring sometimes, yes, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. There aren't any apartments here, just homes. So when I returned to my hometown after college, I stayed with my folks until I was able to afford the cheapest bungalow I could find. I scored a decent job as a marketing coordinator, and 6 months later, I was handed the keys to my house. My subdivision only has 20 houses in it, so I've gotten to know most of my neighbors fairly well in the 3 years I've lived here. But my closest neighbor, Tom, is the only one I would consider more of a friend than an acquaintance. Like me, Tom lives alone. He's a 63-year-old widower, and his 2 adult sons live across town with families of their own. They visit each other occasionally. He stays with them during the holidays, and sometimes in the summer I'll hear the shrill, joyful laughter of his grandchildren in his backyard. But he's on his own most of the time. He's retired, and I don't think he has any friends apart from me. To be honest, he's all I've got too. I mean, I have a few friends at work, but we don't hang out after hours. Every morning at 8, when I'm out getting the mail, and Tom is leaving for his health walk, as he calls it, we stop and chat for a few minutes. It's usually just run-of-the-mill small talk about the weather or our plans for the day, but I always enjoy conversing with him. His sharp wit, booming laugh, and friendly personality reminds me of my dad. Funnily enough, he told me I remind him of his sons. He always says, "Mason, you've got a good head on your shoulders just like my boys." One morning, while I was out getting the mail as usual, Tom exited his house and began walking down his long gravel driveway to greet me. But unlike every day since I'd known him, he wasn't alone. A fluffy, gray dog with a red collar trotted along beside him on a leash. Noticing that I'd spot his canine companion, Tom smiled at me and waved. I did the same, thrilled to see that he had a new friend to keep him company. "New dog?" I called out. "Yeah, I just got him yesterday," Tom yelled back. "Figured it was about time I had someone to take walks with." I tucked the mail under my arm so I could pet the dog. "He's a handsome fella. What's his name?" "Max," Tom replied, reaching down to scratch the dog behind the ears. That was the name the shelter gave him. He already responds to it, so I didn't see any point in changing it. As the two approached me, I noticed Max wasn't wagging his tail or panting. This wouldn't have been strange in and of itself, but it was his lack of animation coupled with the way his eyes looked that made my excitement shift into unease. While the rest of him was gray, the fur around his eyes was black like a raccoon, making them appear sunken in. The eyes themselves were an icy, bright blue, but they were not the soft, gentle eyes of a dog. They were human-like, glowering at me from within their dark pits with an uncanny intelligence I'd never seen from an animal before. Max sat at Tom's feet as he stood next to me at the mailbox. The dog looked up at me, and I unconsciously took a step back as his piercing gaze met my own. He stared, eyes slowly moving up and down as he appraised me, sizing me up as if I was nothing more than a piece of meat. Suddenly, the idea of petting him didn't sound so nice. "You can pet him if you want," Tom said, as if reading my mind. Then, noticing my discomfort, he added, "He's friendly." I could have begged to differ, but I didn't want to seem rude, and although there was a hunger in his eyes, Max wasn't growling or acting like he would hurt me. Tentatively, I reached down and gave him a pat on the head. At least he felt like a normal dog. "Good boy," I said in the pacifying way that someone might tell a wolf, "Nice doggy," as if that would somehow stop the animal from eating them alive. The whole time I talked to Tom, I could feel Max's eyes on me. Thankfully, Tom kept the conversation short, and after they'd left for their walk, the rest of the day passed uneventfully. However, that night, I dreamt of being chased by a gray dog-shaped thing with the face of a man. It whispered in a raspy voice that sounded like bone cracking. "Good boy, good boy, good boy." I woke up sweating, heart racing. I sat up and reached for my lamp, fumbling blindly for the switch. As soon as light flooded the room, I darted my eyes around, trying to spot the hideous creature that had surely followed me into the waking world. Once I was certain that my room was creature-free, I flopped back down on the bed with a sigh of relief. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and told myself it was just a nightmare. I said it over and over, like a mantra, until my heart rate and breathing slowed and I felt calm enough to go back to sleep. I reached over to click the light off, but stopped when I had happened to glance out the window at Tom's house. There was a light on in his upstairs window, and I could see his silhouette standing there. Tom was... No, wait. It couldn't be Tom. Tom didn't have a snout and pointed ears. It was Max. He was standing on his hind legs, perfectly still, perfectly balanced, just staring. I couldn't see his eyes from this far away, but I knew they were looking directly at me. I could feel it. I shivered and drew the blinds. Then the curtains, for good measure. It didn't matter. I knew he was still there. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or maybe Max had a medical issue. Dogs could stand sometimes, but not like that. Not with posture, not with intent. The next morning, I waited at the mailbox for a few minutes for Tom and Max, but they never showed. A part of me was relieved. As much as I wanted to see Tom, I did not want to see that dog again. But another part of me was worried. Tom was a regimented man. He kept to his strict outline and rarely strayed from it. He wouldn't have missed his health walk unless something was up. Then again, he had a new dog now and might have needed to adjust his schedule around Max's bathroom habits. Maybe he left early, or hadn't left at all yet. I managed to convince myself that this was the case and went back inside. That night, when I drifted off to sleep, I was blissfully unaware of the nightmare waiting for me on the other side of consciousness. The dream began with me waking up inexplicably around 1 a.m. I'm a light sleeper, so it could have been any number of things. The odd house noise, the bellow of a train horn, heck, even my own farts if they're loud enough. I closed my eyes to go back to sleep, only to open them again when I heard the sound of a dog barking from outside. It was coming from the direction of Tom's house. As the seconds passed, the barking got louder, closer, and the more clearly I heard it, the more I realized something about it was wrong, unnatural even. I lay there in the dark, listening, trying to discern what was so strange about the noise. The barking continued for a few seconds, paused, and then came the very faint but very human sound of a person clearing their throat. Then the barking resumed. It wasn't a dog at all. It was a person imitating a dog. In my backyard in the middle of the night. What the heck? Confused, I went to the window and opened it. Just as I did, the motion detection light clicked on in my backyard. What it illuminated chilled me to my very soul. Tom was on all fours, barking and looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. His hands and knees were bloodied and bruised, and he was completely naked, save for a red dog collar, Max's collar, around his neck. The collar was attached to a leash, and at the end of it was wrapped around the paw of Max. He stood upright, shoulders slack, head tilted up at the window, and panting, no, smiling, at me. His lips were pulled back to reveal sharp teeth, and his piercing blue eyes burned with malice. My mind screamed at me to help my friend, but when I tried to move, I found myself paralyzed. I could only watch helplessly as Max turned his gaze to Tom. He looked down at his quivering pet, and his grin widened in sick satisfaction. Tom had stopped barking, and now only whimpered, never taking his eyes off me, silently pleading for help. Then, in a raspy, guttural voice, Max spoke. "Tom, sit." Obediently, Tom folded his injured legs and sat on them, wincing slightly. Max licked his lips and snarled, "Speak." Tom opened his mouth and began to scream. I woke up in the same terrified panic I had the night before, only this time, in my frantic search of the room, my eyes found Max's silhouette standing in the doorway. I froze. Terror slammed into me so hard I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think anything except crap, crap, crap. I was trapped in that catatonic state until a wave of adrenaline swept through me and jolted my body into action. I reached for my lamp and flicked the switch with a shaking hand. The instant the room was illuminated, Max's silhouette disappeared. I stared at the empty doorway, breathing heavily. Where is he? Is he gone? Was he even here to begin with? It took me a moment to realize that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But once I did, relief rushed through me. A short, sharp exhalation of breath escaped my lips, as much of a laugh as it was a sob. I put my face in my hands and scrubbed at it, convinced I was going crazy. I lay back down, suddenly feeling exhausted. Somehow, after a while, I was able to fall asleep again. There was still no sign of Tom and Max the next morning. I decided I'd go knock on his door later that evening and ask if he'd changed his morning walk time. As the last of the sun's rays faded from the sky, I walked up to Tom's driveway and gave his front door a few raps. I waited, but there was no answer. I rang the doorbell. Nothing, not even Max barking. Tom's car was still in the driveway. He never went anywhere at night due to his cataracts making it difficult to see. I snuck a peek through the glass panels that ran along the sides of the door, but couldn't see any movement or anything at all besides the darkness. It didn't look like a single light was on. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. What if he fell or hurt himself somehow and can't reach the phone? I thought worriedly. I tried the doorknob and found it was unlocked. I didn't know if that was usual for Tom or not, but it deepened my concern nonetheless. Slowly, I opened the door just wide enough to poke my head in. "Tom?" I called out into the darkness. The silence I was met with sent alarm bells ringing in my head. The nightmares that had plagued my sleep for the last few days surfaced in my mind, and with them came a disturbing thought. What if Max did something to him? I shook my head. That's ridiculous. He's just a dog. I tried to convince myself that this was true, but I couldn't stop the doubt from creeping in. I wondered if I should call the cops, have them do a welfare check instead of just waltzing myself into God knows what. But any rational thought I had was being overridden by an urgent need to help my friend. Cautiously, I stepped into the house. "Tom?" I called again, louder this time. I stood there, listening, but the house was eerily quiet and still. A pit of dread formed in my gut. Where's Max? The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I was suddenly overcome by the feeling of being watched. Desperate for light, I felt along the wall for a switch, and thankfully, my fingers brushed across one on the first sweep. I flicked it on. Shock and horror rocketed through me as I was met with a scene straight from my nightmares. In the middle of the living room sat a large metal dog crate. Inside it was Tom, wearing only Max's collar, and a wave of panic engulfed me as I saw he was sitting in a pool of his own blood, his body riddled with injuries. He was unconscious, or maybe... "Oh, no, Tom, I cried, rushing to the side of the crate. On shaking legs, I dropped to my knees beside him, and my heart sank as I looked him over. There was a chunk of flesh missing from his left arm, and the top half of his left thumb was completely devoid of skin and muscle, leaving only the bone poking out like a half-eaten pork rib. His right leg was in a similarly ruined state. There was a large wound above his ankle, so deep that I could see the exposed white of his shin bone. The bone was marred with indentations that looked like teeth marks, as if something had been gnawing on it. Heart in my throat, I watched Tom's chest, hoping and praying for any sign of life. I didn't know if he could still be alive, with the amount of blood loss he'd suffered, but by some miracle he was. His chest rose and fell so slightly it was almost imperceptible. Relief flooded through me, and I let out the breath I'd been holding. But I sucked it back in as a startled gasp when I heard a low, guttural chuckle from the hallway behind me. My heart stopped. The breath left my lungs as fear gripped my insides with an icy hand. Oh, crap. Despite every fiber of my being screaming at me not to, I turned around, my heart thudding against my ribcage. There, perfectly balanced on his hind legs, stood Max. The light from the living room barely reached the hallway, so he was shrouded in shadows, but I could see his sharp white teeth showing in a wide demonic grin. Drool dripped from his mouth and onto the floor with a soft play. His eyes, which were locked on me, rolled back until only the whites were visible. Trembling, I began to slowly back away. Max's eyes followed my movements, and, in the same raspy voice from my nightmares, he said, "Stay." As if the word had put a spell on me, I felt my body freeze up. My mind reeled, my lungs gasped for air, and my heart raced, but my muscles were paralyzed. I couldn't even move my eyelids to blink. Try as I might, it was frighteningly clear that this evil presence, masquerading as a dog, had me at his mercy. Max's blood-stained lips curled up even further as he revealed his power over me. "Good boy," he rasped. "Now let me chew on your bones." Then he lunged at me, shrieking like metal being torn in half. His claws clicking on the hardwood. Click, 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 click. He ran with unnatural speed and fluidity on two legs, and in the blink of an eye he was on me, leaping onto my chest and knocking me on the ground. Max sunk his teeth into my lower thigh muscle, and I screamed as white-hot agony exploded in my leg. My limbs flailed about, frantically punching and kicking, but Max seemed unfazed by the blows. Blood spurted from the wound as he tore at my flesh with impossible strength. Then there was the sickening sound and sensation of teeth scraping against bone. Max had found what he was looking for. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. My brain had turned to mush, clouded with hazy fog and fear and pain. But somehow a single thought was able to break through. If you die, Tom dies too. You have to get out and get help. With this realization came a sudden overpowering urge to survive. I summoned all the strength I could muster, and with a roar of anger I kicked Max in the snout with my good leg. His grip lessened just enough for me to rip my bleeding leg out of his mouth and scramble to my feet. I ran through the open front door, stumbling into the yard. The pain was blinding, but I didn't stop. I heard Max behind me, claws scraping, that awful voice chanting, "Stay, stay, stay." The house was only a few yards away, but it felt like miles. Gritting my teeth, I bolted up the driveway to the front door and slammed it shut just as Max reached me. I locked it just in case and collapsed to the floor, heaving, clutching my leg in agony. My vision swam, but I refused to lose consciousness before I could call for help. Thankfully, my phone hadn't dislodged itself from my pocket in the scuffle, and I tried to hold it steady in my shaking hands as I dialed 911. As I spoke to the dispatcher, I could hear the sound of claws scratching and teeth tearing into wood as Max tried feverishly to get it. I knew it wouldn't take him long. What would he do to me? Eat me alive? Keep me prisoner and make me his personal chew toy like Tom? Grunting in pain, I dragged myself into the bathroom, leaving a trail of blood behind me. I shut the door and locked it, putting another barrier between me and that monstrosity. However, this final exertion proved to be too much, and darkness began to overtake me. Through the growing haze, I became dimly aware of the sound of sirens growing closer. I prayed that my salvation arrived in time. I woke up in the hospital a few hours later. Thanks to a cocktail of drugs, my excruciating pain had been reduced to a tolerable level. I asked how Tom was, and to my immense relief, they said he was in stable condition. Since I'd told the dispatcher we'd been attacked by a dog, and our injuries confirmed it, Animal Control searched the area around our houses for Max, but apart from the claw marks on my door, no trace of him was found. Before I was released from the hospital a few days later, I visited Tom. He looked well despite being covered in bandages, and he shot me a beaming smile as I walked in. "Hey, neighbor, come on in." He noticed my crutches and added, "Sit down and rest that leg." I hobbled over to a chair in the corner of the room and sat down carefully. "Hey, Tom," I said, returning my friend's smile. "How are you feeling?" "Great." He held up his thumbs. His left was bandaged and significantly shorter than the other one. 1.5 thumbs up. How about you? "I'm okay. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened. I just don't understand." Tom's smile melted into a frown as his face became grim, his eyes somber. He shook his head. "Crap, son, I don't either." He suddenly looked very tired, exhausted from the physical and mental trauma he'd suffered. "All I know is that I'm getting a goldfish next time." I couldn't help but laugh. Despite myself, Tom did too, a booming guffaw, and I knew that he'd be okay. Tom said he'd be staying with his son and daughter-in-law for a few weeks while he recovered. I was relieved, not just because Tom would be looked after by his loved ones, but because he wouldn't be alone at his house, where Max could find him. I know he's still out there prowling around in search of the ones who got away. It's for that reason that I decided to stay at my parents' house for a bit, at least until Tom gets back. I've been missing them lately, anyways, and of course they're happy to have their son home. It's been 2 weeks, and I'm still having nightmares about Max, ones where I wake up screaming. Every time. That's not what worries me, though. My parents' house backs up to a cornfield, and for the last few days, when I've looked out the window at night, I swear I can see Max's silhouette standing among the stalks, always upright, always facing towards the house. I'm keeping the curtains closed from now on, and I asked my dad if I could keep his rifle in my room, just to feel a little safer, and he obliged. I don't know if Max can get inside the house or not, but if he can, I'll be ready. If he can, then it's only a matter of time before I wake up to the sound of his claws clicking on the floor as he makes his way to me. Click, 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 click. The end. Wow, that was a really good story. I myself used to live out in the Midwest, and so I kind of was able to create a really visual picture of what this might look like. Lots of rolling hills, lots of fields, and even cornfields, especially towards Kansas. It's kind of really ominous, a lot of those suburbs way out there. A lot of those newer developments, they have, like one tight suburb, but then all of it just kind of backs up to fields for miles and miles and miles. It's almost like a little pocket in the middle of nowhere as they try to grow those pockets to reach each other. So I can kind of imagine that, especially as he said, it was kind of in a new development. Beyond that, it kind of reminds me almost of the visuals from that movie Signs, if you've ever seen it, of the alien standing on top of the barn, just looking at him through the window as he woke up from the nightmare. Wow, that's pretty freaky to think that one of those dogs, one of those creatures that you're supposed to love, that you're supposed to have as your best friend, something that you're supposed to trust in, could be so diabolical. I think it was definitely a good idea to go over and check on Tom. I definitely probably would not have waited until nighttime to do it, but at least, Tom was okay, right? That's what matters. I think that another different thing that I would have done is, instead of just going in there, after noticing that the door was unlocked, I would have for sure just called the cops. And especially if I looked my head in there just to peek and saw the cage, I probably wouldn't have run over to it. I would have closed the door, run back over to my house and call the cops. It's easy in those situations to kind of want to be a hero, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. But a hero's only good until they're dead, you know? And if, well, I mean, unless they symbolize something greater themselves, of course. But in this case, you know, no. So I think the smartest option would have been to just get out, call the cops, then come back, of course. Easy peasy. Whatever this demon thing is, it's going to take a lot of, take it down. But luckily they're in the Midwest, and there's more guns than people out there. So, yeah, I'm sure he's in safe hands, especially with that rifle. Hopefully. But anyways, folks, what do you think you would have done in this scenario? What do you think you would have done differently? Is there anything that you would do to stay alive? Is there anything you would do to go get the dog? Would you go and get the dog, or would you stay in defense mode? I think from today's story, we can learn that things aren't always as they seem. And there are a lot of things out there that will work actively to subvert our expectations, kind of like this, where the creature chose to be a dog, I would assume chose. Because it doesn't really have any of the characteristics of a dog unless it's pretending to be that dog to inflict damage. So anyways, be careful, everybody. And if you would like to hear more of these scary stories, please make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification, because I will be uploading them daily and you don't want to miss them. Anyways, I've been CC, and thank you for watching. Bye.